Okay, welcome. We are continuing the story of early modern philosophy. Uh, and today we're going to look at the first of the last two figures that we're going to be spending time with in this course. So, recently we've been looking at the skeptical challenges that Hume gives us. So, for instance, Hume tells us that we can't, by reason, necessarily know anything about the laws of nature. Hume also tells us that we can't even necessarily believe in the substance that some people refer to as the soul. So today, we're going to see the first of two lines of response against some of these Humean challenges with this fellow right here, a Scottish philosopher named Thomas Reid. So here's the plan. I'm going to introduce you to Reid's idea of common sense in philosophy, whereas we've seen a lot of conclusions in this course that seem to go against common sense. Reid is going to stick up for common sense. The next thing we're going to look at is this question of whether secondary qualities are illusions, looking at figures like Galileo, Descartes, and Locke. They've suggested, for instance, that the greenness of this coaster on my desk, this isn't a real quality of the object. It's simply a way that my mind responds to a certain thing that doesn't really have any color at all. Well, Reid is going to push back on that. And then we're going to see how Reid deals with skepticism more broadly. So that's where we're going to go today. Now, what are we talking about when we talk about common sense in philosophy? Well, here's what Reid tells us. He says that common sense is all about principles which the constitution of our nature leads us to believe, and which we are under necessity to take for granted in the common concerns of life. So, one principle which it might be built right into us, and which we take for granted in life, is that the future will be like the past, or that there is a world outside of our minds. And Reid sort of points out that not only are we constitutionally built to believe these things, so it seems like Reid is even willing to admit that there's something like innate ideas in us, common to life. He also says we can't give a reason for them. These are what they call principles of common sense, and it's manifestly contradictory to them what we call absurd. Let me give you one more example. Philosophers will sometimes point out to you that we cannot necessarily know whether there are other minds in existence in this universe. Everything might be an illusion. Well, Reid is going to point out that sort of view, the view that your mind is the only one in existence, maybe even that your mind is the only thing in existence. This is a view sometimes called solipsism. Right? So solipsism is the view that your mind is the only thing that is real. Well, Reid is going to say, by the constitution of our nature, the common concerns of life don't let you actually be a solipsist, right? He's also going to say, look, I can't give you an airtight argument that solipsism is false, but we should note that it would be hard to get by in life without believing that the minds of other people exist. And we could also say that not believing that anything beyond your own mind exists is absurd. So Reid is going to say, look, solipsism, even if we can't give a knockdown, airtight argument against it, is an absurd view. This is how we're supposed to use common sense in philosophy for Reid, is to recognize that there are some things that are so against the ordinary way of looking at the world, we shouldn't give them much credence, even though a lot of philosophers have. So Reid is going to point out, for instance, that common sense is going to tell us that sensation and thought require a thinking being. So here we're going to see Reid using common sense to agree with Descartes that in order for there to be thought, there needs to be a thinking thing. They're going to disagree with Hume, who says that, we don't need a substance underneath our thoughts to acknowledge that we are having some thoughts. That's Hume's analogy of the mind as a theater. Right? And here's another thing that Reid is going to point out. Things other than ideas and impressions can be the object of thought. So think about, for instance, this cup of coffee that I have right here. Well, the Berkeleyan approach is going to say, look, the only things that I can perceive are the sense perceptible qualities of this cup of coffee. That it is like sort of a navy blue color, that it has a certain weight, that the coffee has a certain flavor, for instance. But here's what Reid is going to say. He's going to say that when I'm thinking about my cup of coffee, I am thinking about the thing, right? I am not thinking about my ideas about the thing. I'm thinking about the thing itself. And here's another claim that Reid makes. So on page 772 in our Shapiro and Lascano text that I'm borrowing passages from here and what I'm citing, Reid says that the presence of a sensation suggests a presence of a faculty. So basically he says, like, look, when you have sense perceptions, that indicates that you have certain abilities to sense. And also that when you sense things, that indicates the presence of a mind. Right? Now, Reid uses this word suggest here, right? So when he says that you're having sensations and that suggests faculty and that suggests the existence of a mind, what he's saying is you have certain perceptions, and then you draw certain conclusions on the basis of the fact that you just had those perceptions. Now, Hume might tell us, like, look, when we have a perception and there is suggested a substance or a mind underneath those perceptions, Hume is going to tell us that that violates the copy principle. But for Reid, according to Reid, that's going to be a problem for Hume. That's not going to be a problem for the concept of the existence of a mind. So this is like sort of the Reidian approach, right? He's going to say, look, let's try to use our common sense. Now, one of the arguments that we've gotten in this class is that features like color or heat are ways that we respond to objects more so than the way that things really are. So we can ask this question for Reid. Are secondary qualities real? Right? So is the color of an object or the heat of an object a real quality of the object? Here's something funny that Reid tells us. He says, suppose a sensible day laborer meets with a modern philosopher like Locke or Hume or Descartes and wants to be informed what the smell in plants is. The philosopher tells him that there is no smell in plants, nor in anything but the mind. The plain man will find that the philosopher is mad, and that philosophy and common sense are set at variance. Who is to blame for it? In my opinion, the philosopher is to blame. So a big thing that Reid is doing here is he's pointing out that early modern philosophy has gotten off on the wrong foot. And insofar as we've gotten absurd conclusions from early modern philosophy, that's a problem for how the philosophy is being done. It's not about a problem with ordinary common sense thinking. Now, we had arguments, right? We had arguments for the difference between secondary qualities and the things themselves, right? So for instance, we learned some things about sense perception. We learned some things about light refraction, right? Now, Reid points out that using our common sense, the smell of a rose is a feeling. So there he would agree with Descartes or Berkeley, because he's going to say, for instance, that there is no such thing as a smell unsmelt. Right? But Reid will continue. We are uneasy till we find something which, being present, brings the feeling along with it. And being removed, removes it. And this, when found, we call the cause of it. Right? So we might say, like, look, the smell of a rose, well, we would say, like, look, it's not just a mental construct, but instead it is something that goes along with roses. Or if we did even more science, we might even realize that it's a certain volatile chemical compound, for instance. So for Reid, he's going to say that, when we're talking about smell, it signifies some power, quality, or virtue in the rose, or effluvia proceeding from it. Now, to put this into more contemporary terminology, we could say that the effluvia is like the chemical compounds proceeding from that rose. And that, the chemical structure, let's say, has a permanent existence independent of our minds, amid which, by the constitution of our nature, produces a certain sensation. Right? So Reid is going to say, the names of all smells, tastes, temperatures are rarely in common language used to signify the sensations. So he's going to say that the way that we usually talk will be to say that, well, smells are qualities of things. Not stuff in our head, but stuff out there in the world. Right? So he's going to say common sense will actually give us a response to this problem. To not say that, well, smells are only things in the mind. Well, sort of. But we might also say that smells are, ways that certain objects are in their chemical structure. An important point that we'll remember from Locke is this suggestion that there is a resemblance relationship between qualities really in an object, but there is no resemblance relationship between what causes our perceptions of secondary qualities and our ideas of them. But here's how Reid is going to go. He's going to say, this whole standard of resemblance that Locke has given us has gotten us off on the wrong track. Right? So he's going to say, look, our sensation of qualities, so our sensation of the smell of a rose, doesn't have to resemble like what it is to have a certain chemical structure. So for instance, the sensation of heat doesn't resemble what heat is, and the sensation of pain from running into a hard thing doesn't have to resemble hardness. Right? But the way that Reid is going to think about it, he's going to say that sensations are signs of real qualities that we can recognize upon reflection. In fact, this idea of a sign is very close to that earlier remark that I flagged from page 772 about how perception suggests the existence of a faculty and a mind. Right? Well, he's going to say a similar thing here. Like, we can draw reasonable inferences from having certain sensations to real qualities, even if we're not directly perceiving like the chemical structure of something. We're going to say that like noticing a smell is going to be a sign of the real qualities of an object. So the way that Reid's going to put it, like, imagine a quality like hardness, right? He's going to say that's something that we usually admit is a primary quality of things. Like the stiffness or rigidity or hardness is like built into a thing in the way that color and heat are supposed to not be. But against Locke, he's going to point out that our perceptions of primary qualities don't have to resemble what it really is to have that quality. So he points out, like, it's very easy to notice the difference between a stone column. So that's a thing itself, right? It's a stone column. can draw some ridges on it, I suppose. So here's the stone column. And here is a person who, while running too quickly, smacks their head into the stone column. Now we might say that there is clearly a difference between the stone column and the pain that this poor stick man is feeling after running into the stone column, right? But he says other times you might perceive hardness not through pain, but just through simple interaction between yourself and your body, right? So, we could think about yourself leaning on a desk. I'll aim this down at my desk here. In order to feel that the desk is hard, not soft, that it's made of wood rather than sponge, I'm going to press down on the desk. Now, this isn't bringing me any pain, right? But Reid is going to point out that when I'm having these perceptions, well, what's going on? He says, it's much more complicated than a lot of people realize. In fact, not only are you feeling the desk, but you are feeling how your body reacts back to the desk as you press on it. Right? So when you feel the hardness of stone and lean on it painlessly, you're having certain perceptions that actually don't resemble what it is to be the desk or what it is to be firm. Right? And what Reid is going to point out here, he's going to say, in a similar way, color is a quality of body, not of a sensation. He says that we have a constitution. Our common sense tells us that when we have perceptions, that involves an object independent of our mind. And moreover, we have to draw some inferences. You actually have to do a lot of work interpreting your perceptions in order to go from the way that the desk pushes back when you press your fingers on it to thinking about what it is to really be that desk and that there is a desk outside of my mind. So for Reid, he's going to say, we should trust reason, but we shouldn't trust it more than our capacity for perception and common sense. So here are some points that Reid is going to give us in defense of common sense. One thing he's going to say is a theological argument. He's going to say both reason and perception have the same author, and that's God. Right? Now, maybe you don't believe in God like Reid does. So maybe you think that our sense perception is a product of evolution. Well, maybe so. But if that's the case, we might say, look, maybe reason and perception both have some work to do, and maybe they're kind of working on the same team, right? Along with Hume, he's actually going to agree that we don't have the ability to withhold belief in what we see. So as you watch this video, you really won't be able to truly believe that you are dreaming or that this is all the figment of your own imagination. You just don't have the ability to not believe that what you are seeing right now is something real, actual, and out there in the everyday world. Points out it would not be prudent to ignore what perception tells us. So if you really want to be a Humean skeptic, we might imagine, Reid arguing, that would require your believing that rocks will nourish you rather than bread, right? Or that you should leave a house from the second floor window rather than the bottom floor door, right? So because God is the author of both common sense and reason, we shouldn't trust reason more than our capacity for perception and common sense. In fact, they are on the same team, So, how do we deal with skepticism for Reid? Well, you might get a skeptical argument, like a follower of Descartes might tell you, if you can't tell you're not dreaming, you don't know you're looking at a table right now. 2, you can't rule out the dreaming hypothesis. So 3, therefore, you don't know you're looking at a table. Right? Reid basically tells us that if we get an absurd conclusion, he's going to say, well, we can be really certain that 3 is wrong. So we should start to wonder about the quality of premise 1 and premise 2. Maybe we do know we're not dreaming, even if we can't fully articulate it. Or maybe this standard that says you have to rule out every skeptical possibility in order to claim knowledge, well, that's too strong. Right? And in fact, we see a line of argument like this in the later history of philosophy. So Reid's strategy was also famously taken up in the 20th century by G.E. Moore. G.E. Moore gives us an interesting and famous rejection of skepticism. And here's kind of how Moore's argument goes. I know I'm looking at a table, so I can either tell I'm not dreaming. So we can say, like, look, we're pretty sure that premise 3, the conclusion, is false. So either I can tell that I'm not dreaming, so yeah, that's actually the falsity of premise 2, or there's something wrong with premise 1, right? If the falsity of 3 is the thing that we're most sure of when we look at this argument, we should go back and look at premise 1 and 2 and see what went wrong. Right? As we could put it, the denial of the conclusion is more plausible than either premise 1 or premise 2 in this argument. And in this way, we should maybe not let reason push us around so much. Maybe we should trust common sense in some cases. So, beginning of the course, when we looked at Descartes' skepticism, he said, look, don't believe something unless you can prove absolutely for certain that it's true. One way of putting this is to say that for Descartes, a perceptual belief should be treated as guilty until proven innocent, and not until we have the guarantee from a non-deceiving God should we trust our sense perceptions. But for Reid, he almost seems to be saying, like, look, perceptual belief should be treated as innocent until proven guilty, right? You don't have to give me every single argument against every single skeptical hypothesis in order to tell me that you know that it's partially cloudy out today, that it is November right now, that I've got some coffee left in my cup, that I have 2 hands connected to my body, right? These are all certain skeptical challenges that we might be left scratching our heads over. But Reid is going to suggest use your common sense and give your perception a bit more credit than that. And if you do, you will actually know many more things than you would if you followed the advice of these modern philosophers. So, in other places beyond this reading, Reid sometimes says that, the approach that modern philosophy can be characterized as what he calls the way of ideas. Right? So this is the approach that Descartes and Locke and Hume take. You start with ideas and then try to get knowledge from there, right? Reid is going to suggest that his approach doesn't start with ideas, but he might call this like the way of truth or the way of reason. And he's going to say, look, once we start thinking about common sense, one thing that he's going to notice is you perceive more than simply ideas, right? It's not simply ideas that you perceive, but for instance, looking at my window, I just saw a leaf fall out of the tree. I didn't see the idea of a leaf falling from a tree. I saw the leaf itself. In this way, Reid is going to say, starting with perception and building our way out is a mistaken way of thinking about how God built us to actually perceive and understand the world. And we have this constitution that leads us to believe in not just our own ideas, but a world outside of our ideas. A world that through ideas is suggested to us, and which we can use common sense to get at. So in this way, Reid is going to be against this sort of way of ideas approach, and he's going to say, look, use common sense to get us towards the way of truth. So that's one line of thought that we're going to see as a response to the sorts of skeptical challenges that we've learned about this semester. Now we're going to see one more way of coming at this, a very different way, next time from Immanuel Kant. So I'll look forward to continuing the conversation with Kant in the near future. Take care.